Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Medicine Shortages, Tackling Symptoms or Root Causes. My name's Laura Shields. I'm the Managing Director of Red Thread Communications and a former BBC journalist, and I will be your moderator for the next hour and a half. So today's webinar is unsurprisingly about medicine shortages. And as I'm sure you all know, medicine shortages have become a critical issue for patients in the EU. The European Commission recently published the Pharmaceutical Strategy, and one of the issues that was considered is how to prevent and mitigate shortages when they occur. So this is the context of today's webinar, to discuss prevention by addressing the root causes of medicines shortages. Before I hand over to Christoph Stoller, President of Medicines for Europe, who's going to welcome you more fully, I'd just like to run through a couple of housekeeping points first. We have a great panel of speakers for you today, and you're going to see them up on the screen in just a moment, but we're going to talk through them one by one. I'll introduce them individually as they come up. Each speaker will have about there they are up on the screen now. Each speaker will have about 5 minutes to outline their position on the issue and their recommendations, followed by a couple of questions. Now, you as the audience, if you're watching via Zoom, you can participate via the Q&A button, not the chat, the Q&A, please. And please do send your questions in as they occur to you, because if they're good and they're pertinent to the conversation, we'll bring them in early on, or you can post them and keep them later. We can keep them for later in the panel. Just a couple of pointers on questions. If you would like to ask one, please keep it short, focused, and tell us who it's for, because we'd like to get through as many as possible, and that will really help us out if it's a specific question. So I hope you enjoy today's event. Do get the questions flowing. We want to have as an interactive discussion as possible. And in the meantime, I'm very pleased to welcome Christoph Stoller, who is the President of Medicines for Europe, to welcome you more fully and set the scene for today. Christoph.
Thank you very much, Laura. And ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome from my side as well. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us today. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar. Let me start with a very strong statement right away. It's very clear for me, and it cannot be a question mark, that patients have the right to be confident that supply of high quality medicines is certain and predictable, or in other words, simply guaranteed. We take for granted and secured what's in our medicines cabinet, and only when an unexpected event like COVID happens, we realize the implications of not having our medicines readily available. It's our joint duty to ensure that medicines can be produced and reach the patients at all times. This, however, requires a sustainable business model, as a strong pharmaceutical value chain entails many investments to secure security of supply. Almost 70% of medicines dispensed in the European Union are generic or biosimilar medicines, supplied by the members of Medicines for Europe. Our industry directly employs 190,000 people at over 400 manufacturing sites and 126 R&D sites. Given our public health, social, and economic role, it is our duty and responsibility to reduce as much as possible the risk of shortages for patients. This workshop today gives a great opportunity because the European Union has just released the European Pharmaceutical Strategy, as laid out by Laura in her introduction, which includes many proposals which are linked directly or indirectly to medicine shortages. You will hear more about that during this webinar. Before I give back the floor to Laura, who will moderate the discussion, I would like to make a couple of more remarks. For me, there are 4 key principles that should guide our discussions related to shortages. First one is sustainability in pricing. We need to stop the race to the bottom, focusing only on the lowest priced option. Second, predictability in market dynamics. Shortages are linked to unexpected demand variations, which cannot be readily addressed if not anticipated. Third, more flexibility to help, for example, medicines or APIs moving from one country to another. This requires a well-working two-way dialogue with competent authorities, which must be permanently established. We all know that we would not be where we are today if we would not have received the support of the European Commission to establish this much-needed dialogue to avoid major shortages during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Medicines for Europe had the honor to work with Sylvain Giraud and his Commission colleagues on a project to prevent shortages of ICU medicines, the much needed ICU medicines. It has not been easy, but we find a well-working way to align industry and government for the benefit of patients. And I'm sure we can continue this and we can do even further in the future. And fourth, a holistic approach. There are many actors, both within and outside of the supply chain, whose decisions impact medicines availability. Shortages are not just the responsibility of the manufacturers. So with that, Laura, I'm stopping here, and I'm really looking forward to a very interesting discussion and webinar. And Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christoph. And Christoph is going to be talking again in a moment about the market reform side of the issue when it comes to shortages. So I'm very pleased to welcome our first speaker, Sylvain Giraud, who Christoph mentioned briefly just now. And Sylvain is the head of unit for medical products, quality, safety and innovation at DG Health and Food Safety at the European Commission. So he's going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then we'll have a couple of questions afterwards. And if you'd like to send any questions in now for Sylvain, please do. So Sylvain, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning. Can you hear me well?
Beautifully.
Okay. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you to Medicines for Europe for inviting me to join. Unfortunately, my background is not as natural as Christoph. I wish I would be in such a nice environment. But this morning, it's this very interesting subject that you've put on your agenda, which is the shortages and how do we tackle symptoms or root causes. I think this is a very interesting title. Maybe we get to discuss what exactly we mean here. What I wanted to tell you as we're starting is that since the beginning of this pandemic, and we've had another opportunity that maybe we didn't fully seize before that to develop a certain number of learning, collaboration, mutual understanding in the area of health and in the area of medicines policy. And there's been a lot of insight coming out of the crisis. Some of the things that we were aware that have become so evident that action was actually needed and that we would need to take collective action at EU level involving all the different actors and players. So, and this is actually the occasion to acknowledge, and it was just mentioned by Christoph, the way some mobilization took place in your industry during the crisis, in particular through this hospital ICU medicine initiative that you coordinated and with your colleagues in FPA put together and developed. And this was a good model of mobilization of the industry taking their responsibility to fulfill your dedication or your objective to supply markets appropriately and to when confronted to the surge of demand and some unpredictability in the demand indeed. So when it comes to shortages from the Commission, we're looking at it from two strands of work. One is related to the crisis, and it's about crisis management. It's about how can we improve our collective and cooperative capacity to monitor, mitigate shortages when they are there, when they are happening. And the other strand is more structural, more systemic, more long-term, and it's about creating the regulatory environment and the market structures that anticipate and prevent the shortages to occur and then ensure the security of supply and the continuity of supply. So we're working on those two strands. One is related to the crisis. The other one is more long-term, as I said. So the first is very much trying to build on the lessons learned from the first wave and what we've gone through or we're still going through. And this took the form of a series of policy proposals and legislative proposals that the Commission made on the 11th of November, which we have actually gathered under the same name, a common label, which is European Health Union. But I think this actually means quite a lot for those who want to develop more collective action at EU level. This was announced also by the President of the Commission herself in her speech on the State of the Union in September. So as part of this package of proposals that we put together on the 11th of November, there is the suggestion which we're putting on the table of the co-legislator to reinforce the capacity and the competence of the European Medicines Agency to address shortages and to propose to the member states' national authorities to cooperate strongly, much more stronger together, and to develop cooperative tools. This, of course, does not start from scratch. There has been already a history, even before the crisis, of developing some tools and instruments, and we're building on what has been there and reinforce that through this legislative proposal. The second strand is about, as I said, a regulatory environment, market structure, longer term, more systemic changes that need to address what has become actually a systemic issue, which is the shortages issues become a systemic issue. So this is what we aim to do through the pharmaceutical strategy that was already mentioned, and that we presented on the 25th of November, and which is in a way the second pillar of this European Health Union that we are now developing across several actions between now and next year. So the strategy is looking as you might have noticed through the whole life cycle of medicines in a very broad and holistic approach, and taking all the different elements of challenges that have been that we've been confronted to in terms of affordability, availability, accessibility, securing supply chains, support need-driven innovation, environmental sustainability of production and disposal and consumption. So there are many aspects to the strategy. If I focus now on the availability, shortages and security of supply, the aspects, those aspects in the strategy and the actions that we propose, and I don't want to be too long, but we can come back later. I would quote just, or we mentioned just a few. First, the strategy is going the strategy announces that we're going to propose revision of the pharmaceutical legislation, the framework, the legislative framework. And as part of this revision, as part of this evaluation, the strategy is quite clear. It says that we should propose to revise the legislation to reinforce the obligation of continuous supply and to address shortages through specific measures, including stronger obligations for supply and transparency, earlier notification of shortages and withdrawals, enhanced transparency of stocks, and stronger EU coordination and mechanisms to monitor, manage, and avoid shortages. We've launched a study to look at root causes and possible legal framework modifications. And this study that is ongoing will inform that process of evaluation, revision of the legislation to move into the direction I just mentioned. The second action, mentioned briefly, is a cooperative one, to look at strategic autonomy. How do we build this strategic autonomy? There's been a lot of political discussion around that. A lot of words are being used, reshoring, strategic autonomy, and so on. We feel in the Commission, that's what we're saying in the strategy, that the knowledge is not there to be able to take evidence-based action. and that we need first to build a much stronger case, a much stronger understanding, at least for the public authorities, of what the market is, of what the supply chain is, of what the manufacturing chain are, in a way that we can, on the basis of that thorough analysis and knowledge, discuss what type of measures need to be put in place to address public health needs, because that's what we're looking at. Of course, there might be industrial policy dimension as well, but we are here from the point of view of the health authorities looking at the health problems. What are the health problems that we need to address through a strategic autonomy policy? I stop here, sorry, I was already too long. With these two strands, I hope I gave you already a certain idea of the directions we're working on.
Thank you very much, Sylvain, you certainly did. And actually I have a very quick follow-up question for you, if that's okay, which is, what do you think the main lessons the Commission learned, or I mean, Commission, but in general, the sort of whole supply chain, what lessons do you think were learned about shortages during the COVID-19 crisis, and where the demand spikes were important? Why did that matter?
Well, I think we learned that we don't know much. At least that's what public authority learned, that their capacity to know collectively and to manage the crisis situation in terms of supply was limited. And the public authorities at every level realized, well, first, because this was never their job. A lot of the medicines agencies or public health authorities, they've not been looking at the market. They've not been looking at the manufacturing. They've not been looking at the supply chains. They've been looking at security and safety, because that's what they were asked to do. And this is different. When you look at the quality, you don't look at the volumes. So it was this is what we've learned. We've learned that for public authorities, it's actually not a good idea just to rely on them on the supply and that, you know, the things are going to just follow the surge of demand. That public authorities need to get involved in understanding better what's going on, because they can't just rely on the fact that, you know, it will follow through.
Thank you very much. And a final question for you, Sylvain, if I may. The Commission is proposing a more efficient digital approach to managing medicine shortages in the future. But what's the EU actually going to use the data for? So basically what I mean by this is, what actions will it take to mitigate a shortage situation, but also cooperation with industry, with member states, or a combination?
Yeah, that's exactly this. That's it. So we want to build on existing tools. You know, even before the crisis, we had within the EMA, with the national competent authorities, the national agencies, put in place a certain number of tools, reporting system, notification system, something that's called SPOC, the single point of contact. I mean, we're taking this through different steps of process. This was developed as ad hoc, then came the crisis, then it was really recognized that this type of digital or IT tools. So I mean, the question is not whether it's IT or digital. The question is, do we have a good tool to monitor the shortages and to use that for cross-country cooperation and cross-country response. So through the crisis, we felt that this needed to be reinforced. This is now what we're trying to do with the proposal we've put on the table by giving a new mandate to EMA, strengthen their responsibility and their capacity to actually address this and act on this much beyond what we have. So we are formalizing what existed and we boost it and we take it one step further. But then this process is continuing through the strategy and the announcement that we've made, that we will also look at maybe new legislative provisions to actually address also some of the regulatory environment and how we can reinforce it to prevent shortages in the first place, as opposed to just monitor and mitigate them when they are there.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. And actually, I said it was the final question, but it's the final question from me, but we do have one from the audience for you, if that's okay. So the question is, Is overregulation one of the causes of shortages? And should there be more flexibility, for example, to move products across different EU countries?
Well, everything needs to be looked at, and I think this is one of the we're looking at the causes of shortages. We're looking at what we want is to document very seriously the situation. Some people would say, "Oh, it's all because we are dependent on third countries," and then you get other people telling you that no, it's not true. We're not dependent on some country. Or you even get other people that tell you, "Yes, we are dependent, but that's not necessarily an issue." So, you know, all kind of this, then overregulation, yes, well, overregulation, it's already, just using overregulation as a word already indicates that um, uh, we are in a debate, because you know, some people would probably believe that it's what some people would call overregulation, some others may call underregulation, or lack of safety, or rules and so on. So, you know, the discussion has to take place. Certainly, we're not in an internal market for medicines, and the possibility for products to circulate across countries is limited because of a certain number of situations. But these situations also are there because this is how the system works. This is how the EU member states have decided to organize it. And they have their legitimate reasons for that. There are legitimate reasons in relation to how their health systems work, and health systems are different and are organized at national level. There are legitimate reasons in the way quality, safety also has to be organized, or sometimes from a local point of view, which is also very relevant, including in terms of languages of and this kind of thing, and in terms of the way they coordinate with the medical profession, with the patients, with a lot of other things. So there's quite a lot of things that can be done centrally, but you know, the system as it is at the moment is a system that also relies on a certain fragmentation, because this is due to certain legitimate concerns of public authorities too.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. Sylvain Giraud from the European Commission. Thank you for being with us today. And if you'd like to ask any more questions, please do put them in the chat box and we'll come back to them later on. So I'm now going to go back to Christoph Stoller from Medicines for Europe, who's going to talk a little bit more about the market reform issue. So Christoph, if you'd like to put your camera back on, my first question to you is coming up. So yes, voila, and there you are. All right, so Christoph, I want to talk a little bit about the economic root causes of shortages. Which ones do you think it's most important to work on if we're going to prevent them?
Yeah, the most important one, Laura, is clearly what I mentioned in my intro as the first point. It's the sustainability in pricing. So it's this race to the bottom. And let me give you a very specific example. Since I'm living in Germany, it's the largest market for generics in Europe. What we have seen the last 10 years is that the net price that manufacturers in Germany get after rebates for the DDD, so the daily defined dose, is a third of what it used to be 10 years ago. We are now at 6 cents per DDD per day. And if you multiply this by 30, then you know it's €1.80 per month, and you would not even get an espresso for that, at least not in Germany, maybe in Brussels. But so just I think we need to see that. And why do I mention this? Because at the end of the day, then manufacturers need to, you know, the price is a fact. That's the market which defines it, and then we as manufacturers we need to act accordingly. So this is one example. Another example would be the clawback mechanisms. We still have countries where there is a clawback mechanism. So maybe I briefly explain this. So if a government says we have a budget for medicines of, let's say, 100 million, and then if we overspend, this overspending needs to be paid by the industry. Now, if we then as generics industry have to bear the higher expenses of the originator industry, for instance, this is really causing a terrible burden for us, as we both know that generics and biosimilars are helping for the sustainability of our healthcare systems. As they offer better options, we can increase access. So that's another example. So overall, you know, looking forward, talking about solutions, what we need to make sure is that we change the way that medicines are being procured, right? We need to go away from this lowest price option. We need to go away from the winner takes it all, meaning we need to make sure in tenders that we have more than one winner. Because what does it mean? If this one winner has a problem in the supply chain and cannot offer the medicine for whatever reason, then the whole market is dry. If we have multi-winner tenders, there are other suppliers who are still there. So that's one thing. And then we also need to make sure that the decision in these tenders is taking into account more than price criteria only. That can be, reliability of supply. That can be environmental criteria, for instance. There's many other stuff, and that is the important thing. And if you would build or buy a house or have new windows or something, of course, price is always important when you take a decision, but the quality will be as important, right? You use other criteria, and that's what we need to do. And this is something which the European framework offers already today. It's called MEET, the most economically advantageous tender criteria. And we need to make sure that we are using this also in medicines procurement.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but espresso doesn't cost 6 cents in Brussels either. I wish it did, but it doesn't. Okay, so next question for you. If these reforms sort of went ahead and the market does become more sustainable from your perspective, will this actually lead to more investments in the supply chain resilience, do you think?
It certainly will. It certainly will. But I think we also need to be realistic, right? And I think Silva just mentioned it before. I think what is not going to happen is that every country in Europe is totally independent with its medicines manufacturing. That is not going to happen. But what we need to think together, and that's why this dialogue between the Commission, the regulators, and the industry is so important. We need to sit together and to really discuss what are absolutely essential medicines. And then we need to think, okay, for these essential medicines, how can we ensure security of supply for these? We talked about ICU during the wave 1 of COVID. We can talk about antibiotics, for instance. And then how do companies take investment decisions? They take investment decisions, it's a long-term decision, right? And companies need to know that the framework is stable and that it will be sustainable in the long term. And then investment is going to happen. Now, how can this be? This can be in a kind of a price guarantees, or it can be volume guarantees. And the one example I would like to mention, which is an extremely positive example, is the example of Sandoz in Kundl in Austria with the Austrian government. The last antibiotics manufacturing we have in Europe. And then the government and the company agreed together that this is really essential. It's also a great decision for all European patients. And they made a deal together, and that's fantastic. So we know that we will have security of supply in Europe for the next coming years for that specific antibiotic. So that's just one positive example I wanted to briefly mention.
Thank you very much, Christoph. And don't forget, audience, if you have questions for Christoph, he is going to be with us until 11 o'clock. So please do put them in the Q&A, and then we can always ask them later on as when we have the general discussion. Thanks very much, Christoph. And I'm now going to introduce our next speaker, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rosa Giuliani, who is the Director of Public Policy at the European Society for Medical Oncology. So Rosa, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm trying to share my screen, and hopefully this is working or not. Yes, there we are. So good morning, everybody. I'm afraid that my background is even worse than Sylvan one. So definitely, then we can have a contest, a competition about the best background in presentation. It's really clear that the reason why, so I'm a medical oncologist, and as was said, I'm the Director of Public Policy at ESMO, which is the European Society for Medical Oncology. And as such, it's really very clear to understand why we are very into the discussion of addressing cancer medicine shortage. The ESMO vision is, of course, to secure the best possible outcome for patients, for people with cancer, and relies on three main pillars. And one of these pillars is the access to sustainable cancer care, high quality and sustainable cancer care, which include, of course, access to cancer medicine. And we are experiencing different type of problems with access of cancer medicine, which very grossly can be divided in problems in access to expensive cancer medicine, but even more important, access to an availability of inexpensive cancer medicine, which are the ones that unfortunately suffer more of the shortage. As a global society, we have over 25,000 members and even more oncologists, of course, all around the world. And we know that this is a problem that is experienced in every single country. There is no country that can be exempted by this problem. And what I want to remind the audience, of course, you are already well familiar with this concept, but I think that should be reminded, because when talking of shortage of expensive medicine, cancer medicine, we are talking of essential cancer medicine. And essential cancer medicine means that they are indispensable to treat virtually all type of cancer. It means that virtually all patients with the cancer, does not matter which type, they need this medicine, and they are under the threat of the shortage. So this is a very important concept. We really need also to remind that about the vast majority, so over 80% of the essential cancer medicine in the WHO list are actually inexpensive medicine and are those that undergo shortages. And we know that the availability, as I say, it's very uneven among countries, but everybody is experiencing this problem. I'm glad that we have this type of initiative and discussion, because at least so far, the problem of the the shortage of inexpensive medicine, if you want, has been a bit not tackled systematically and not discussed properly, and sometimes has been a sort of a hidden problem. And this, I think, it's part of the fact why we are late in addressing this problem. And of course, it is important to bring innovation to patient. We want to bring innovation to patient with new drugs that, as I say, may be expensive, but the implication behind the unavailability, the lack of availability of inexpensive medicine are even much broader. So as a society, what we done? First of all, between 2014 and 2017, we ran some studies about the availability and the accessibility to cancer medicine, both at European level and at international level. And it was clear that there is a huge problem there. So that's why, in collaboration, we promote further work, and in collaboration with the Economist Intelligence Unit, we prepared a report suggesting 6 policy recommendations to prevent and manage cancer medicine shortage. And of course, we went on launching a call to action at the European level that was signed by member of parliaments and was very welcome at the high level. We have done again in collaboration with the Economist Intelligence Unit some profiling work in 5 countries, which I'll show in a second, and we will relaunch again the surveys to understand what's changed, how the situation is changing compared to a few years ago. This is just the list of the recommendations. We can discuss maybe later if there is time. And this is a slide just to show you that is referring to the profiling research that we've done in 5 European countries, which you can see are countries with a different maybe economic asset. And if you compare, 2 different countries such as Romania and Germany, we can see that there are, every country is experiencing shortage. So there are, it's not just related to the wealthy status of the country. This is the call for action I refer to, where we call for 3 main points, which is first of all agreeing on what shortage is, mapping the shortage, working together in order to create a common definition of shortage, and then position the inexpensive essential medicine shortage as a key political priority for the European Union. And following our work, we were invited to state our position in the Lancet journal, and there are other information that can be found in a dedicated page on the ESMO website. And I think that for the sake of discussion, I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take it.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And actually, I do want to follow up on what was the recommendations that you sort of gave us the brief slide overview of. So can you just talk us very briefly through what the main recommendations are that you made when it comes to preventing shortage of essential cancer medicines?
Yeah, so basically, I'm very happy that some of the points were actually already mentioned by Giro, for instance, which means that, there are very, if you want, common sense points, okay? We are not just asking for the moon. It's something that everybody knows that should be done. So, for instance, a good synergy between different levels that may be like regulator, the, government, so the commission, and then it should be a cascade, which is going to, of course, include the national member states. So we need to ensure that what is going to happen and be planned at the European level, at supranational level, is going to be clearly uptaken at national level. We should have a list of shortages, and it should not be done just once, okay? Because we know that the cause of shortage may be multiple, may be different, may change in time. So there should be a sort of live system to monitor what is going to happen, because it's a kind of a fluid situation. Other recommendation, it's there should be the system or legislation, if you want, that has been already mentioned, to have a quick notification of shortages. So I don't want to be in a situation as a medical oncologist that I'm in front of a patient and I receive the call from the pharmacist saying, oops, we do not have, there is a shortage of the drug that you have prescribed. So I think that all stakeholders, there should be a system in a way that for which all stakeholders are going to be, included in the loop. And we need to act, preemptively, in the sense that, of course, we need to tackle the possible shortage. Every national member state should have a list of essential medicine that needs to be, continuously monitored in order to understand if something is going to happen, and then, of course, understand the cause and preempt the solution. And of course, there are also more technical points, such as the introduction of incentives, which in a way has been maybe part of the problem for the inexpensive medicine because of clear implications. So mainly to have the situation clear, agree on the definition of shortage, monitor the shortage of drugs.
Thank you very much. And very quickly, would you say that your recommendations are getting traction with the different policymakers that you're talking to?
Well, I think so, because when we, as I mentioned, when we work on the subject, I think that there was a very great response. We launched the code that was signed by at least 20 members of parliament. We engaged in the discussion. And to be honest, I'm very happy that this morning, most of the things that we were asking for have clearly been uptaken, at least by the Commission. And I think that there is a very positive attitude and climate to develop this further. So I think so, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us today, Rosa Giuliani. And don't forget, if you're in the audience and you want to ask a question, you can put it in the Q&A for Rosa, and we'll come back to them after the speaker round when we go into the panel and Q&A discussion. Thank you very much, Rosa. And I'm now going to introduce our next speaker. We're going to talk a little bit more about supply chains again now. And Damien Holly is the head of supply chain management at Sandoz Novartis, and he joins us now to focus a little bit more specifically on the supply chain challenge. So Damien, when you're ready, please do feel free to put your camera on.
Hopefully you can see me now.
Yes, perfectly.
Good. So as you said, I'm here to represent Sandoz and Novartis, but actually more importantly, I'm here to represent the industry because, we've got a specific point of view and specific access to information that may help to provide clarity on some of the issues that we've got. And in fact, my role within Sandoz is really there to provide access to medicine. That's the number one thing that we try to achieve. And, we reach out to over 500 million patients every single year. So as a supply chain head, I actually have to facilitate the delivery of products to patients. And we do that through a network of sites in the supply chain. And of course, that involves inventory management, it involves forecasting, it involves distribution, and it involves logistics. So I'm also the Sandoz representative for Medicines for Europe for supply chain. And actually, we were focused on answering the shortage question. Then, of course, COVID happened, and we obviously got sidetracked. We started to work on that in January. So we've now returned to this question. So maybe, Dorothy, if we can move to the next slide, please. So on this slide, I want to talk about what's the difference between a generic manufacturer and originator. We've got different kinds of business models. We tend to talk about the pharmaceutical industry, but in fact, there's more than one industry. We have different setups. We've got different costs, different risks, and different rewards. And supply chains in all cases are actually long and complex. There are many, many stakeholders between finished dosage form and delivery to the patient. The entire supply chain has to be held responsible for shortages and not just manufacturing. You can see how many players are actually involved if you look at the diagram on the screen. And of course, regulation is part of this complexity, which also runs through all of the different players on the screen as well. So just to give a bit of a flavor of that, we have good clinical practice, we've got good manufacturing practice, we've got good distribution practice, we've got good laboratory practice, and other forms just to start with. So the originator's value and complexity and cost is primarily focused on R&D. Generics, actually, the cost is biased to the supply chain. And regulations, I think, we talked a little bit about this already with the panelists. Regulations are there to add value to protect our patients, and we fully support that. However, decisions need to be taken on how to regulate our supply chains, and these can have a really profound impact on the sustainability of supply. It can actually have the effect where therapeutically important molecules become financially unviable, and legally we can no longer sell them. So the economic impact leads to consolidation of manufacturing, it leads to market exits when it's no longer viable, and finally, it leads to shortages. Can we move to the next slide, please? So this is just an example of a normal supply chain for the pharmaceutical industry. And of course, our supply chains are very, very complex. Most of us, when we walk into the pharmacy, we just expect the product to be available on the shelf. Few of us actually understand the complexity of getting that product to the shelf. We actually appreciate that the EU Pharma Strategy has encouraged dialogue on how to optimize the supply chain. And you can see in this example that the average product has over 350 components, starting right back at raw materials, but even these raw materials have their own supply chains. So every single component needs to be on time, otherwise the final product will not be. After about 6 months from the first raw material purchase, we are using our active ingredients to make the bulk product, which then goes on to be tested and packaged for country-specific requirements. Who would have thought that for most products we have prepared 2 years in advance, and it's in production nearly 1 year before it's actually needed on the shelf? Let's take a look at the next slide on supply chain risk management. So, as an industry, we have 3 primary levers to manage risk and avoid poor supply. We've got inventory, we've got sourcing strategy, and we've got the manufacturing network. Inventory management requires us to prioritize molecules that carry the highest risk to supply. Given that manufacturers do not today have the visibility of all stocks in the marketplace, we have to forecast demand and take into consideration national and regional stock. Our forecasting process is therefore critical, and inventory is there to manage differences in the forecast and the actual demand. Dual sourcing helps us to avoid risk of consolidated manufacturing and relying on one site. We identify supply chains at the highest risk and again prioritize products accordingly. Lastly, the manufacturing network is important. We want to preserve the current strong EU footprint, and we already talked about one of Sandoz's plants today in Austria. For the future, we must also consider where our plants are positioned in order to be able to have fast launches and get product to our patients. Network analysis actually is not very easy to do. So there may be multiple sources of manufacturers using the same product or the same sources of product or raw material. We would wish to improve this, and hopefully improved digital regulatory systems in the future can enable authorities to provide more transparency and help us to pinpoint these areas, and we can make changes where necessary. So let's have a little bit more of a look at stock and dual sourcing on the next slide, please. So stock and dual sourcing combined with supporting existing footprint are the answer to resilience. And a little bit more detail, our stock strategy consists of in-transit stock, which is the stock between production and country, cycle stock, which is required to cover the time between the order, policy stock, which covers protection of essential medicines, and safety stock, which protects against demand and supply variability. For dual sourcing, we target drug substance first, as it has the longest lead time. Finished product has safety stock sitting in the countries, and for drug product, we focus on registering 2 sites. Both stock and dual sourcing cost money to maintain them. You can see that to add a second source costs somewhere in the region of 300,000 to $1 million, depending on the complexity. Issues around stockpiling and the cost of dual sources for resilience are discussed, thankfully, with the Commission and member states and the industry. Obviously, we wish to avoid hoarding, and if the EU does want to have a reserve in a limited way, we would ask that, for example, labeling would be limited to a specific number of languages, and we consider what we would do in the case of write-off of that material, because of course it could also have not just the cost of the write-off, but environmental impacts. Can we look at the last slide, please? So the future. So the industry will continue to further dual sourcing inventory policies. We will continue to improve site reliability and reinforcing the supply network. While there has been a call to reduce dependencies on other territories, and again, we've already heard that this morning, this is only a solution if there's a shift of focus from industry and governments. I think that shift in focus could be in 4 key areas. The first is data transparency to enable appropriate collaboration, such as a risk where multiple manufacturers are using the same raw material. And we need inventory transparency the whole way along the chain. Secondly, we must reward manufacturers for supply resilience as it costs money to implement. We welcome that in the recently published EU Pharma Strategy, the recognition that shortages are frequently for products that have been on the market for many years and are widely used. The strategy also quotes that reasons are complex and include parallel trade and issues linked to pricing and reimbursement. Thirdly, I think we need sustainable contracts and pricing, which we've talked about again this morning, to help us diversify production and supply chains, as well as fostering production and investment in Europe, as also noted in the Pharma Strategy. Lastly, and somebody asked a question on this, regulatory flexibility, as we saw during the COVID crisis, has reduced red tape as product being moved from one country to another, where previously had no MA and was not in the country's language, was able to take place. This enabled us to move product to where the patients needed it, and without doubt, it actually saved lives. So in summary, I think we must address the causes and not the symptoms. If we put these actions in place through dialogue with the industry, member states and the Commission, my belief is that we can look forward to a better future where supply chains are resilient and shortages are a thing of the past.
Thank you very much, Damien. And actually, Damien, if it's okay with you, we're going to come back to you for questions in a moment, just because I'm keeping an eye on the time. Sure. And I know we're going to lose Sylvain, but at 10:30, and we do have a couple of audience questions first. So Sylvain, if you're still okay to take some questions from the audience, I'd love it if you could put your camera on now for us, please, because we do have one that is coming in for you. So question from the audience for Sylvain. The member states were pretty cool about the European Union health legislative proposals, or the EU Health Union legislative proposals on the 11th of November. Does this mean that they have a different idea? Did the member states have a different idea about what the COVID crisis 19 or the COVID-19 crisis meant from the Commission?
Yeah, were they very cool? I don't know. Is this based on what the minister said in council on the 2nd of December, or I'm not sure. I mean, I think the member
The
states.
question just says they weren't applauded or welcomed by member states. I mean, so whoever put that question in, if you want to clarify on it, then you're welcome to. But this is just a sort of an assertion from the audience.
No, but I think I understand what it's meant, but I think we need to wait a bit before we get to this conclusion that they would not be willing to move ahead. I think the opportunity is there, the political momentum is there. No one can say that the coordination that took place between the member states in what we now call the first wave was exceptionally good. I think there are many examples of the contrary. So I think the need to reinforce and strengthen the cooperation mechanisms that we have, including through the role of the EU agencies, is something that we, at least in the Commission, feel very strongly about. And this is why we've put this proposal on the table. So now, you know, the member states have also to take their responsibilities. If indeed that's not the right way, they will have to explain how to do that better. But as far as we're concerned, we think that this is a very good way to actually learn from the crisis and put in place new cooperative mechanisms.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Silva. And actually, seeing this is good news that you can stay until 10:50. So we'll come back to you for some more questions later on. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so Damien, I'm going to kind of back to you because we've got a couple of questions that have come in for you now from the audience as well. So question for Damien, how much of the cost or the 300,000 to 1 million cost of dual sourcing is directly linked to the regulatory cost?
Sorry, I've got to put my camera back on again.
That's okay. Did you hear the question or do you need me to repeat it?
No, I got the question. So I
Great.
think from a regulatory point of view, the figures that I put in front of you were really more for building the structure of the factory and validation of the product, getting it through development and making sure that it's safe to get to patients. There are many, many costs actually from a regulatory point of view that people don't consider and that are relatively hidden. So for example, there are many changes to regulatory text for artwork that's increased significantly over the last 3 years. And of course, it takes time to make these variations. And then we have to reproduce the product. So it takes time to get that back to the patients. Equally, the reporting of shortages is non-uniform and it's repeated many times over and it's done per market. And that's not necessarily the most efficient way to do it. And then, of course, you know, we've just implemented serialization across the whole industry. So if we think about the capital cost of changing the lines within our factories, all of the updates from a system point of view, and of course, the burden of these resources is actually constantly picked up by the industry in a situation where prices are eroding. So I think, you know, we've got to think about the combined cost of regulation and price cuts that can actually make marketing generic medicines unsustainable for suppliers and can threaten supply. So we've got to think about it in a much more holistic way.
Thank you very much. Now, when it comes to strengthening manufacturing supply chains, what do you think it's essential for both the European Commission, well, the EU, but also for the member states to do? So the Commission and the member states separately. What do you think are the specific things that would help us to strengthen the supply chain?
So I think actually the first thing I would say is I don't think they should do it separately. I think they should do it together. And I think they should also do it with the industry in a combined way, because together I think we can do a better job. Overall, the Commission and the member states for me are responsible for building the right environment with the industry through their policies in order that we can continue to give patients access to medicine. So there have been many announcements by governments over the last while. We've heard about health sovereignty, we've heard about localization of manufacturing, we've heard about incentives to secure supply of critical medicines, we've heard about procurement of stockpiles and actually regulation for all of these, including penalties for stockouts and the increased reporting. So I think we must address the causes and not the symptoms of these issues. And so I'd go back and I'd say, listen, we have to get data transparency across our supply chains to enable the appropriate collaboration to take place, to make sure, for example, where we have one manufacturer producing a raw material, that's made visible, and actually as manufacturers we can do something to shore up our supply chains. I think they can also set policies around incentivizing manufacturers for supply resilience, because you know, this costs us money and we really want to do it. Believe me, we want to put it in place, but there's certain products that we can't put it in place for, and they can help us with that. We need to ensure sustainable contracts and pricing, because again, and I think we heard a little bit earlier about how that can help us to diversify and ensure our supply chains for the future. And lastly, again, back to regulatory flexibility, I think as shown during the COVID crisis, we made it work, and we got to think about how we're going to use that for the future. So a properly functioning medicines economy and a regulatory system actually go completely hand in hand.
Am I on mute? No, I'm not on mute. That's a rarity in my case. I seem to have a lot of people saying, Laura, you're mute. You're on mute. Thank you very much, Damien. And there are more questions coming in for Damien as well. Or if you'd like to put more questions for Damien, please do so, because we're going to have plenty of time, I hope, for those questions afterwards. But just a quick reminder, if you're in the audience and you want to ask one, please do make sure that you do it in the Q&A function, not the chat box, because we're not checking the chat box for questions. We're checking the Q&A box. So just a reminder to please put them there. But Damien, thank you very much for that. And I'd now like to introduce our final speaker. Dr. Michael Horn is from the German medicines regulator BfArM. So Michael, thank you very much. And please feel free to share your screen if you're going to talk us through some slides.
Yes, I hope you can see my presentation, and I thank you for the opportunity to present BfArM perspective. I try to manage it in 5 minutes. BfArM established a system for managing of supply shortages since 2016, and with a focus to mitigate and avoid relevant shortages, supply shortages. For this item, we made a cooperation with all stakeholders, with a panel of the so-called GeoFix on delivery and supply shortages since September 2016, and with respect to identify possible solutions. In April 2020, we became a legal mandate. So the GeoFix was upgraded to an advisory board, and we also got legal responsibilities to order measures, in particular on allocation of quotas, on stock keeping. We can request data from companies and wholesalers to manage shortage situations in a better way. How is the system? Shortages are reported to BfArM via a form or via a database, and our drug database added some information, and then these drug shortages are automatically published on our website, and then the internal assessment starts with a focus on criticality for the availability of medicinal products. Therefore, we use our internal drug database with all the information that are inside, and if it's if we need it, we get in contact with other companies. We take the advisory board and the knowledge of the advisory board to discuss and solve problems, and more and more we have a look at the market relevance and regional distribution of the involved products. What we have learned from the first wave, we always say that each actor has the responsibility to avoid supply shortages. This is the pharmaceutical industry to ensure the reliable supply capability, the health insurance that have to make fair prices, the pharmacies with a objective advice and avoidance of hamster purchases, the doctors with an appropriate prescription of medicines, and wholesalers to ensure a continuous supply in the area. In the first wave, we saw that not in every part this worked very well, and so BfArM has issued some some orders, one for stock filling and demand orientated supply in March this year, and in case of hydroxychloroquine, we made an order in April this year. Members of the advisory board, it's a little bit small, but it's a huge number of organizations that are included, and they represent all stakeholders that are involved in this kind of theme. Since April, we started in July. We have now, as a new member, the National Association of Statutory Health Insurance Funds. We have representations from patients as well in our team, and even the Federal Association of the SVS physicians. And so now we think that we are completed in our team to solve problems on a national level even better than in the past. We have always to show that we have an ad hoc problem, or we have a midterm strategy. When we have ad hoc problems, then the relevant point is that everyone who is involved in this supply shortage has to act in a very professional way, and only if everyone follows the decisions of the advisory board, the supply shortage can be managed. For a midterm strategy, and this is what we've heard in the other presentations, that's our point of view, that we need incentives that must be in place to decrease market concentration, that we get even more diversity in the market. For this case, our GeoFix has drawn up recommendations for improvement of the supply and relevant drugs in hospitals. This recommendation is even available on our website, and we also took the questions in this advisory board, which products should be produced even more in the European Union. And the advisory board discussed it in the focus of the pandemic situation, and so we addressed in total 22 active substances which should be produced even more in the European Union. These substances are also published on our website and should be discussed within the EU presidency of Germany. And so we think that we have in Germany a real good system to manage these drug shortages in an ad hoc way, but even that we made our ideas how solutions could be made for a better future. So I will end with my short presentation, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I've just got a couple of follow-up questions for you. Can you tell us a little bit more about the GeoFix or GeoFixé process and what went into drafting it? And also, just to be clear, that the GeoFixé is a dialogue with German stakeholders and authorities. What went into that initiative, and what are the recommendations that policymakers can learn from it when it comes to shortages?
Yes, I would like to say something about the recommendations I talked about. This was in 2017. There we discussed the shortage situations with antibiotics in hospitals. And the representations of the hospitals and the pharmaceutical company came to the same result, that too low prices for medicinal products increase higher costs in hospitals. The way is that hospitals need to assign personnel for supply shortages, and if necessary, they have to switch to a more expensive medicinal products or therapy options. And so we had to put these teams together and to show what's the aim, how we can make transparency and reliability, so that the industry can get more money for the products, and the hospitals get a more robustness of the supply chain.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's super interesting, actually, that last point. And I think probably the audience are going to have questions on it as well. We have lots of questions coming in from the audience now for the different panelists. So if you could all switch your cameras on, that would be great, and get ready to take a few questions. Because our first question is for Rosa, actually. So our first audience question is, do you think that the EU, or rather not the EU, but should the list of essential cancer medicines be agreed at a national or a European level, Rosa? And I think you may still be on. Oh, yeah.
To be honest, I think that I would say both. If we are a union, we have to have, as been already mentioned, very well coordinated action. Okay, and so it should be a sort of chain reaction. Okay, taking into account the diversity of member states, whatever you want. But here we talk, as a medical oncologist, I'm thinking of patients. Again, I'm thinking mainly of cancer medicine. And so I'm thinking of patients in different cancer, in different member states. For me, the important point is that there is a map and there is a joint action that actually can be coordinated at supranational level. It should be done as a cascade at the national level. Maybe the shortage that are experienced in a country are not exactly the same of the shortage experienced in another one. So there should be a system that almost in real time can inform us of what cancer medicines or medicines in general are undergoing under the problem of shortage. And everybody should be informed. So I don't see the distinction. I see the collaboration, and I see like an agreed action.
Thank you very much, Rosa. So no distinction, coordinated action. Thank you very much for that. Okay, next question from the audience to Christoph. Christoph, are you seeing any positive developments from politicians or payers when it comes to tackling the root causes of shortages?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, what I talked about earlier on are topics which we discussed already before COVID happened. But if there is a positive outcome of this crisis, then indeed it is that everybody realized that without the strong manufacturing footprint we still have in Europe, we will not have been able to deal so well with this COVID crisis. And then I talked about the root causes, and that we need to go away from this lowest price option, and we need to take into account other criteria. And yes, indeed, there are some very positive developments. One is the EU Pharmaceutical Strategy we talked about earlier on. Silvan had mentioned it. And then let me take a very specific example of Germany. One of the largest insurance companies in Germany, Barmer, they have publicly announced recently, a couple of weeks ago, that they're going to move away from looking at price only, that they will include other criteria. And that's also important, and I really very much appreciate that it will be done in collaboration with the key stakeholder, the industry. So basically that this insurance company and the industry will work together of how this should work in practice. And I think this is a very positive development. And last but not least, Dr. Horn mentioned it just now. Certainly the German presidency, also the Minister of Health in Germany, Mr. Spahn, they have done a lot of work in that context for positive developments. So overall, I'm rather positive that we are really on the right path to change things for the benefit of the patients.
Thank you very much. Michael, we have a question for you actually that's coming about BfArM, which is how did you define the list of critical products and what is the process to decide that?
Oh, it's a real complicated question. I think about 10 years or more, we discussed a list of relevant medicine, of relevant active ingredients. At least we published a list in 2017, I think about 530 substances. It depends on who is asked. The list is okay or something is missing. So it's a list we always discussed in the advisory board and discuss if there's something missing, if there maybe a substance can be deleted or a substance has to be added. And so it's a dynamic list. For these 22 substances, we focused on a very, very small point. So because we think that it doesn't make sense to have a look at all the 500x substances to make solutions for better production in the European Union. So we think we start with a small number, look how it works, and then we can show if we can develop this thing, or if we have to look for other solutions.
Thank you very much. Okay, question for Damien now. So Damien, audience question for you. If we have multiple suppliers, including some based outside the EU, will EU requirements to retest imported products add too much complexity?
So it certainly does add complexity to our situation. It also extends our lead times. And of course, the longer the lead time, the further we are away from the patient, the sooner we need to actually start production, the less information we've got on demand, for the actual patient demand in an individual pharmacy. So we talked earlier about this, maybe starting production a year in advance. Well, when you get into a complex supply chain like that, you're probably talking, more like a year and 3 months. So anything that we can do to shorten the length of the supply chain and make it faster obviously increases our ability to respond to demand, because demand is less variable in the short term than it is in the long term.
Thank you very much. Okay, Sylvain, question for you. I know you're plugging in, so can you hear us now okay? Yeah, you can hear us. Brilliant. Okay, question for you, Sylvain. So somebody in the audience asks, the pharma strategy proposes dialogue on some issues between governments, industry and stakeholders, patients, doctors, etc. How should that dialogue be organized so that it drives real reform and avoids talking shops, as sometimes happens in the EU?
Yeah, sometimes, but sometimes they're useful too, no? I don't know. So I don't know whether the question refers to what we actually have labeled in the strategy as a structured dialogue. This specifically focuses on the security of supply and how to address what some people have now labeled as the open strategic autonomy, and how do we improve that, how do we reinforce that, how do we build this. So we feel that we need this dialogue, but not as it's exactly the contrary to what the question suggests. I mean, we don't want to have this talk shop. I think we've had the talk shop for several years now. Then we had the crisis, and it showed that we just have to go further. So what we feel we need is to document the problem and evidence and develop the evidence of what the problems are. Everyone says that there is a problem, but not exactly the same problem. So we need to look at this issue of strategic autonomy. What is a problem? The concept of criticality. What is critical is central there, and this is why the lists are important also. But they are difficult to put together. But these are the kind of discussions we want to have, and we want to have it across the chain. So the finished product manufacturers, but also the API producers, what comes from where. I mean, we saw the slide from Damien where you start with a little point over there, and then you end up with, I don't know how many it was, more than 300, you think you said. So, you know, this is the kind of thing we need to be looking at, and where we need numbers, we need figures, we need an understanding, and we need to look at this from the point of view of health and public health, because there might be a need for an industrial policy. That's fine, and this is maybe something that we need to consider. There might be industrial policy aspects to this that are very legitimate and needs to be developed, and other parts of the Commission are also looking at this. We're looking at this together. But the primary concern at the moment is to ensure security of supply for public health purposes. This is what our process will be looking at primarily. So it's not reshoring for the sake of it, or it's not reshoring because we need to build European industrial basis. Yes, maybe, but primarily the focus also because of the lessons learned from the crisis is on the public health dimension of this.
Thank you very much. And Sylvain, before we lose you, we do have one more question for you, which I'm also going to put to you and Michael. So question to Michael and to Sylvain. The German agency uses a digital portal to report shortages. If we want to collect EU data on shortages, would it not make more sense to harmonise the collection of data by national agencies and aggregating it at an EU or EMA level? And that would avoid data errors in the system as experienced during COVID-19. So Michael, do you want to have a go at that first, and then Sylvain can pick up on sort of from the EU perspective?
Yes, if I understand the question well, I would prefer that the shortage situations are reported to the national competent authorities and shared with the EU, because the situations in the different countries are not always the same, and so we have maybe some individual cases in one country and another country, but some data may be yes, relevant to fill it in a global database.
Thank you. Sylvain, do you want to pick up on that one as well?
Yeah, you know, it would not be appropriate to put up a system that would sort of develop a parallel track to what already exists. I mean, what we certainly are looking at, and the modalities of this new strengths and reporting and monitoring capacity that the agency will put in place based on what already exists. These modalities would need to build on what already exists, and they would need to look at interoperability between what already exists at national level and what is actually needed from that for an EU level conversation or policy action. Because it's not because there are already some systems at national level that it's not necessary. I mean, the EU level is not going to look at the same issues than the national systems are for. The national systems are to address some of the problems. I mean, if there is a problem with a shortage in the pharmacy on the Schumann roundabout, this is for the Belgian authorities to deal with. The Commission is not going, or the EMA is not going to be looking at that. However, the fact that there is a systemic shortage in the roundabout, in the pharmacy on the roundabout, is an issue that can be bring up because it actually reflects similar issues across Belgium and across Germany and across all the countries, and then it needs to be addressed in that context. That's one thing. And so I think there can be different level of reporting, and there can be different level of policy actions as well based on the same chain of reporting. But also I want to insist on the fact that what the proposal we've put on the table now is primarily focused on the situation of crisis. So the type of reporting that is necessary during a crisis, when we have triggered through the crisis management systems that we have at EU level, a situation of threats to public health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And do we have time to ask you one more question, or do you really have a hard stop now?
Yeah, one more.
Okay, literally one more, I promise. This is the last one for you, Sylvain. Okay, so final question for you, Sylvain. The Commission is proposing stronger obligations on manufacturers to supply the market, but what should companies do if the government lowers the price to below profitability?
Well, you know, any action at EU level or legislation has to be proportionate. This is a principle of better regulation. So obligations, if there were to be new obligations, they would be looked at and they would be discussed and they would be assessed with this principle of proportionality. Are they actually necessary to address what we're trying to address? So we'll look at this if we propose new obligations. For the moment, the obligations that are in the proposal we're making on EMA, they are very specific to the crisis context, and they make certain obligations on market authorization holders, centrally authorized products, to provide a certain number of information. And this is in the context of the crisis. If we were to reinforce some other obligations, you know, of course, these aspects of the cost of this, but I don't think we should have this sort of very simplistic approach that any obligation, you know, is a cost, and any obligation would necessarily mean that prices would need to be increased. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Thank you very much. Christophe, Damien, do you want to come back and respond to that? Christophe, if you'd like to come in first, you're very welcome to.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I would like to make two comments. One was the question about the dialogue, and I think I would just reiterate again how successful this dialogue has been during the crisis. You know, I myself attended the weekly calls with the commissioners, and it was really excellent because we came up with challenges that we have seen when the borders closed, when our truck drivers didn't get across the borders, when our supplies, you know, we have seen it from Damien how supply chain works, right? And if the borders are closed, our whole supply chain would collapse. And then the Commission really acted immediately with solutions. The Green Lane concept has been introduced. And I just would like to say that has been extremely successful. And I do believe that going forward, such a structured dialogue is helpful. We have also a very good example from Germany with the pharma dialogue. And I agree, it should not be a blah, blah meeting. That is not what I'm talking about. It has to be a solution action-oriented thing. But that's the first comment I wanted to make. And the other comment, indeed, look, at the end of the day, let's face it, if we are not able to get a price which is higher than our cost, it's totally unsustainable that we need to be on the market. So hence, like I said, we really have to address the sustainability challenge.
Maybe I can add to that. I think, you know, you're absolutely right, Christophe, to point out that we've worked hand in glove really with the agencies across the period of time of COVID. And frankly, without their help and the industry working together, there would have been many more patients that were impacted by COVID. So thankfully, we were able to do that. I think we now need to look to the future and to try to do this in a different way, in a more sustainable way that will enable us to do it going forward without us having to be in crisis mode. And so I think there are many elements to the regulator strategy that could actually help us. So we need to understand, first of all, what a shortage is, because of course, in today's environment, there are many definitions of stockouts which are diverse. We don't actually all measure the same information. So trying to get data on what actually is a stockout and how many stockouts we've got is virtually impossible because it's actually measured at different levels in the supply chain. If you go to one country, it will be actually measured at a pharmacy level. If you go to another country, it will be measured at a manufacturer's level. And of course, if a manufacturer is in stockout, given that we're in the off-patent sector, it doesn't mean that the market is not being served because primarily there are other actors still involved in the market. So we need to move towards that digital solution with a single central EU definition that prioritizes the molecules. And again, priority is a key word because we can't focus on everything. When we talk about therapeutically important molecules, we can't have all of the molecules being therapeutically important. That means that nothing's important or nothing's getting prioritized. I think there's an element of risk management and all of this as well. So how do we understand from the regulators where they can pinpoint and help us to show where there are vulnerabilities within our supply chains, then we can respond and actually do something about it. And believe me, we want to do something about it. That's our job. And the last point really that I'd make, and it gets back to the financial aspects and, you know, being in a negative margin situation. When we talk about penalties for shortages and safety stock regulations, my big fear is that that's actually going to push us towards more market exits. We've already got a lot of products in our portfolios which are on knife edge. We just about managed to have a supply chain that functions. Maybe it doesn't function as well as we would like it to do because we haven't got the funding behind it to make it do that, but we keep the product on the market. If we start to penalize from a penalty point of view and we start to increase stocks, my big fear is actually that we're going to start seeing many more market exits, and that's not the situation that we want to be in.
Thank you very much. Okay, and before we wrap up, we actually have one final question that's come in. Rosa, this is a question I'm going to put to you. An audience member or an audience participant has raised concerns about the direct harm a shortage could cause for patients. And your research at ESMO does underline the same concern that we need to protect cancer patients from the risk of shortages. So how can we ensure this patient concern is central to the future policy discussions in the EU?
So I think it has been, I totally agree with the comment / question point raised. And I think that the reason for working and trying to keep this point high in the political agenda resides in the fact that we cannot relax, okay? So if COVID has taught us something, is that when there is a problem, we can react, okay? Maybe it takes some time, but we react. We've done fantastic things. So my question is, why cannot we do the same thing on a systematic way, even in peacetime, okay, with respect to the problems, for instance, so shortage, which is not the only problem, but is the one that we are discussing today. Then I'm very happy that about you know, the alignment and the comments that I heard this morning about mapping and acting. I think this is the main message. I'm less happy when we start again into the discussion of there is a sort of contrast between you know, the European government agency and the national competencies. Once again, I think that the only way to succeed is to work and harmonize action, and this can be done because other situations have taught us so. So we need, of course, to discuss it properly, but this can be done. And actually it's true, patients are dying, not only from cancer. So we really need, we cannot relax. We really need to keep this topic high on the political agenda.
Thank you very much, Rosa. So that brings us to the end of our discussion. Thank you very much to the audience for all your questions and comments throughout, and also obviously to our speakers. There's actually quite a lot of consensus in the debate about how to tackle shortages, whether it's looking at more technically regulatory issues or specific market reforms. So there is quite a bit of consensus there. Just to close this off, I'd like to ask each of the panelists that are remaining. We have said goodbye to Sylvain, sadly, but I'd like each of the panelists who are remaining, if you could, give me one practical recommendation, 15 seconds, so this is the challenge, that would be the next step that we could take now to making shortages, you know, less common in the future. So I am going to start with Damien. One practical thing that should happen.
So I'll take the supply chain, direct supply chain aspect of this. So I think we need data transparency to enable appropriate collaboration, such as risk management across the entire supply chain. We shouldn't be thinking about this just at country level, because let's remember the central part of the supply chain is actually supplying all of the countries.
Thank you very much. Michael, one practical recommendation.
Yes, I think one main point is that we need more diversity in this whole area. And if we learn from the topics and in our recommendation that the supply shortages lead to higher costs in the healthcare system. So I think we can open our minds and discuss where we need to pay more for medicinal products and where we can lose these costs.
Thank you very much. Rosa.
So as I say, I think that we need to have a clear idea of what's going on. So mapping is essential in real time, which implies the digital transformation and you know, an alignment of systems between EU and national member states. Only knowing what's going on will allow us to preempt shortages.
Thank you very much. Okay, so more data transparency, more diversity in terms of looking at how we can rectify the shortages leading to higher costs and where the pricing issue features there, mapping, alignment between national and EU systems so that we can really have the accurate picture. Christoph, final thought from you.
Thank you, Laura. I think I talked about sustainability in pricing before, so let me talk this time about the market predictability. It's also about that helps us, right? The better we can forecast, the easier it is to prepare our supply chains.
Thank you
and
very
the dialogue.
much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much again to all of our speakers, and thank you to the audience. Thank you for Medicines for Europe for hosting today. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and you'll be able to watch it again on YouTube at a later date. Thank you all very much.